Racist police officer arrests rich black boy, but when father shows up, the father does this. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's emotional and eye-opening story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. We're always bringing you powerful stories that remind us just how important it is to stand up and protect the ones we love. Also, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know what country you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories reach and connect us all across the world. Now, let's get into this. It was a bright afternoon in an upscale shopping district, the kind of place where people stroll with designer bags in hand, expensive cars gleaming in the sun. Everything about this part of town screamed wealth and success. Among the crowd was a young black boy, Jordan Kingsley, just 16 years old. Jordan was a smart, well-dressed kid who had just finished shopping at some of the finest stores. With a smile of satisfaction, he held bags from a luxury boutique. He'd done well in school recently, and his father had rewarded him with this shopping spree. But what was supposed to be a joyful day for Jordan was about to turn into something he never expected. As Jordan walked toward a nearby cafe where he planned to meet his father, his phone buzzed with a message from him, telling him to take his time. Everything seemed perfectly normal, until a police car slowly pulled up beside him. Inside the cruiser was Officer Jenkins, a veteran cop who had spent too many years on the force and carried a world of prejudices with him. Officer Jenkins, white, middle-aged, with a hardened expression, gave Jordan one long look and made a snap judgment. He was certain, in that moment, that Jordan didn't belong there. Now, Officer Jenkins didn't know anything about Jordan. He didn't know that Jordan came from a wealthy family. He didn't know that his father, Mr. Kingsley, was a well-respected corporate lawyer. None of that mattered to Jenkins. All he saw was a young black boy carrying bags, walking in an area where he believed people like Jordan didn't fit in. He nudged his partner, Officer Brown, a rookie still learning the ropes, and nodded toward Jordan. "Look at that kid," Jenkins muttered. "Bet you anything those bags are full of stolen goods." Brown hesitated. He wasn't so sure. Jordan didn't seem to be doing anything wrong. He was just walking, minding his own business. But Jenkins was determined. "Let's go have a chat with him." So, they turned on the flashing lights and pulled over, cutting Jordan off mid-step. He looked up, confused. What could possibly be wrong? Officer Jenkins got out of the cruiser, walking up to Jordan like he already knew the boy was guilty of something. "Hold up, kid," Jenkins said, his voice sharp. "What's in the bags?" Jordan, trying to keep his cool, responded, "Just some clothes. I've got the receipt if you need it." But when he reached into his pocket to show the receipt, Jenkins tensed up, his hand moving dangerously close to his gun. "Easy now," he barked. "No sudden movements." Jordan froze. What was going on? Why was this officer treating him like he was a criminal? "You sure you paid for all that?" Jenkins pressed. Jordan was stunned. Paid for it? Of course he had. Why would anyone assume otherwise? But the officer's eyes were full of suspicion, not reason. Jordan tried to explain. He even offered to show his ID. But Jenkins wasn't listening. His mind was already made up. The next thing Jordan knew, Jenkins grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back, shoving him against the police car. The handcuffs came out, cold and heavy. "What are you doing?" Jordan shouted. "I didn't do anything wrong." Officer Jenkins didn't care to him. Jordan was just another suspect. "You're under arrest for suspicion of theft," Jenkins said coldly. Jordan looked around in disbelief. A small crowd had started to gather, people watching, some of them pulling out their phones to record what was happening. But that didn't help Jordan. He felt helpless, humiliated, angry. And then something unexpected happened. Jordan's phone, which had slipped out of his pocket when Jenkins slammed him against the car, started buzzing. Somehow, the FaceTime call he'd made to his dad earlier had connected. On the other end of that call, Mr. Kingsley. Jordan's father, sitting in a cafe not too far away, saw everything through his son's phone. The police officer pushing his son against the car, the handcuffs, the rough handling. His calm, professional demeanor vanished in an instant. He stood up, left his coffee on the table, and walked out, heading straight for his car. Mr. Kingsley was not just any man. He was a successful lawyer, someone who had fought hard to get where he was. someone who knew exactly how the world worked. He had seen racism before, lived through it, fought it head-on. But when it came to his son, the calm exterior he showed the world could only hold back so much. Within minutes, Mr. Kingsley was in his car, driving toward his son. His mind was focused, sharp, but beneath it all, there was a seething anger building inside him. No one, not even a police officer, was going to get away with treating his son like that. Meanwhile, back on the street, Jenkins was still searching Jordan's bags, patting him down aggressively, looking for any sign of wrongdoing. Jordan, trying to hold back tears of frustration, said, "You can check the cameras. I paid for everything. Call the store, they know me." But Jenkins wasn't listening. He was too busy trying to prove his point. And then Mr. Kingsley arrived. The crowd parted as Mr. Kingsley walked toward them, a man with a purpose, a man who wasn't afraid to speak up for what was right. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but dangerous. Jenkins looked up, surprised. He wasn't expecting this. "Who are you?" Jenkins sneered, trying to maintain control of the situation. Mr. Kingsley looked him dead in the eye. "I'm his father, and I suggest you let my son go." Jenkins, trying to hold on to the last shred of power he thought he had, scoffed. "Your son was caught with what looks like stolen goods. We'll figure it out down at the station." But Mr. Kingsley wasn't having any of it. "No," he said, his voice firm. "You won't be taking my son anywhere, and if you don't release him right now, I'll make sure you regret it." Jenkins blinked, suddenly unsure of himself. He tried to push back. "Look, I've got probable cause." "Probable cause based on what?" Mr. Kingsley interrupted, his voice cutting through the noise. "Because of his skin color? Because he's walking in a neighborhood you think he doesn't belong in?" The crowd murmured in agreement. Jenkins was suddenly aware of all the eyes on him, the phones recording, the fact that he was no longer in control. And the man standing in front of him, this father, was not someone to be underestimated. Mr. Kingsley stepped closer to Jenkins, lowering his voice. "You've unlawfully detained my son. You've humiliated him, and you've done it without a single shred of evidence. If you don't uncuff him right now, I promise you, this will not end well for you." The crowd grew quieter. Jenkins glanced around, feeling the weight of the situation closing in on him. Slowly, reluctantly, he pulled out his keys and unlocked Jordan's cuffs. "It was just a misunderstanding," Jenkins muttered, too embarrassed to meet Mr. Kingsley's eyes. Jordan rubbed his sore wrists, his face full of anger and disbelief. "You should have listened to me when I showed you the receipt," he said bitterly. Mr. Kingsley looked back at his son, then turned to Jenkins. "We're leaving, but this isn't over." As Mr. Kingsley and Jordan walked away from the scene, Officer Jenkins stood there, frozen, knowing that the situation had spiraled far beyond his control. The crowd, the recording phones, the man who knew his rights better than anyone, it was all too much. Jenkins knew deep down this wasn't going to end well for him. That evening, in the safety of their beautiful home, the Kingsley family sat together. Jordan was still shaken. He hadn't done anything wrong, but the memory of being treated like a criminal was burned into his mind. His father, though, wasn't going to let this go. He made phone calls to his lawyer, to the police department, and even to the local news. He would make sure what happened to his son wasn't swept under the rug. And as the Kingsleys sat together, comforting each other, Jordan's father looked him in the eye and said, "We're going to make sure they pay for this, son. No one gets to treat you like that. Not today, not ever again." The Kingsleys knew the fight wasn't over, but they also knew they had each other. And in a world that still struggled with prejudice, that was their greatest strength. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.